everyone? Leah B. Jackson here with pro gamer Greg Idgefield.
Hey, Leah.
Hey. Today, we're going to be running you through the best way to play as Falstad in Heroes of the Storm. Grab your hammer and let's go. Okay, now here we are with Falstad in try mode. Why don't you fly us through his abilities and tell us a little bit about him too.
Okay. Falstad is a super mobile sustained damage dealer. And the first cool thing about him is that he doesn't actually have a mount. Instead, he's always on this bird. And his passive, well, it's a gryphon, actually. And his passive is that after not taking damage for 6 seconds, he gains 20% increased movement speed. So that's the compensation for not having a mount. And his Z is instead flight, which allows him to fly to anywhere in... If you look at the minimap, you can see the circle of exactly how far he can go. It's nearly across the map. It's very high range. So we're just going to fly on over into here. You see there's a bit of a cooldown, and then you can actually watch him fly on over. So there is definitely a time delay to all of it, but the amount of mobility that provides is just absolutely amazing for early game fights. We'll talk more about how to use that later, but now we're just going to go through his abilities. I already mentioned his passive Tailwind. His first active ability is called Hammerang, and that's just a line AoE damage dealer, and it does a slow as well. I believe to everything it hits, so 25% slow for 2 seconds. So you're just gonna, it is a skill shot, so you gotta hit him. And there we go. And it's a decent amount of damage, a good slow, but just kind of a generic damage ability. And then his W is called Thunderstorm. It actually has a passive. We'll see if it procs anytime soon here. Where there we go, we saw a little lightning bolt. Every few seconds, it randomly damages something nearby you with a bolt of lightning. Then you can also activate that to cause 4 different bolts of lightning to come out. And now this is a very interesting ability because it hits everything around you at random. So if you're actually isolated with an enemy, like if there were no creeps here, if we could get Arthas isolated, all 4 of those bolts would hit him. And they do diminishing damage, diminishing by 25% each hit. But that can all stack up to be, I believe, the biggest level 1 nuke in the game. So that's something very very powerful to keep in mind if you do manage to isolate an enemy. And then your E is your escape ability, and it's called Barrel Roll. And you can see the distance of it. It's a pretty decent distance. One interesting thing to note about it compared to other gap closers and escape maneuvers is that it can actually go over terrain. We can't demonstrate that in the tri-map, but I could hop over that if this were an actual game. So that's a very useful ability. And then the ultimate we're going to be looking at is called Shock and Awe. It's a gigantic line AoE, just high damage nuke. It has a bit of a cast time and an animation, so it is pretty easy to dodge if you don't set it up well. It's great to stack with other CC. But really just a generic, good AoE nuke kind of thing. It's great for picking off heroes because it is such long range. That's the only real unique thing about it.
Great, now let's check out his talents.
As for talents for Falstad, at level 1, probably going to be taking Path of the Assassin. It's always hard to pass up Bribe, especially on a hero as mobile as Falstad, but you have to keep in mind your role. You're not a utility, you're not a tank, you really need that damage. And he has pretty limited damage output to begin with. He's very much so like Vala, with a few different trade-offs. So that extra 50 damage at level 25 is a big percentage of how hard he hits. So Path of the Assassin for level 1. The 2 upgrades to his Barrel Roll are not particularly necessary. It's already a pretty long range, and the shield increase is nice, but I don't really feel it's as good as Path of the Assassin. The level 4 talents, I almost always get Vampiric Assault on him. He is a sustained damage dealer, and that's what Lifesteal is for. The longer he's in a fight, the more damage he's putting out, the more health he gets back. Everything else at this level is kind of okay. The Stormhammer, this gives you a little bit of splash damage, but it's not really that noticeable. It's not nearly as big as Fury of the Storm or anything. It's just honestly not worthwhile. It's not as big of an impact as Vampiric Assault. And then the other 2 are just upgrades to his W and Q, which don't really do too much. A little bit of a damage buff, but nothing worth noticing. At level 7, you're almost always going to want to get Fly Away. It reduces the cooldown of flight by 20 seconds. And that pretty much halves the cooldown. And that is the biggest part of your hero, is that early game mobility, the ability to participate in ganks anywhere around the map to secure multiple objectives at once. On Dragonshire in particular, you just fly down, you take a shrine, you can fly to the middle and take the dragon immediately. A ton of uses like that, so having fly up as often as possible is the best possible thing for this hero. So you're almost always going to want to take that. Then for level 10, he has 2 different ultimates. Aerial Blitzkrieg is actually a very powerful ability, and with a few tweaks, that would be the go-to ultimate. The problem is, Falstad is a very squishy hero, and he has mobility issues besides his Barrel Roll. So and this is an AoE focused around the hero. So to use it well, you really want to be in the middle of the team fight, but if you get Falstad in the middle of a team fight, he's probably going to die, especially because you probably have to use Afterburner to get him into range for it. So Unfortunately, this is a great ability, but it's not really practical for the current hero design. I would expect this to get buffs in the future, and then probably become the go-to ultimate, but for the time being, we're going to stick with Shock and Awe. It is that big line AoE damage that I showed you just a second ago. Pretty simple, self-explanatory. It's just, it works much better with the kind of range, play it safe, and deal damage from afar style that Falstad really fits into. At level 13, as always, Giant Killer is a great option for any damage dealer. Everything else here is a little bit iffy. Crippling Hammer gives you a much bigger slow, but really that's not too big a deal. You're not going to have problems chasing people down because you are so mobile, and you have pretty good damage output. And then everything else here, the passive upgrade on Lightning Storm is just not very good. Overdrive is interesting, but he's not too much of a caster. He's more right-click damage focused, so Giant Killer is. And then at level 16, Afterburner is definitely the go-to here. It gives you 100% movement speed for 3 seconds after using Barrel Roll. This guarantees that as long as you hold on to Barrel Roll for your escape, you're never going to die. It gives you additional mobility in chasing down people, cleaning up fights. It's really just a ton of great utility, and it really gives you that survivability you need, because Falstad is completely a glass cannon. You always have to keep that in mind, and this helps you survive that fact. At level 20, Blast of Awe is a bit okay. It doubles the range, which means that you're going to be able to hit anyone as long as you can actually line it up and deal with the cast time. And it deals a bit more damage, 25% more damage, which is decent. If you've been getting great ultimates all game just because either they're bad or you're good or you have great setup or whatever, this is worth considering. It's okay. But generally, I get Fury of the Storm on him. I play him very much so like Volley. You just sit at the edge of the battles and you put out constant DPS. So Fury of the Storm is just more DPS for you to use. If you have trouble getting caught, Bolt of the Storm is always the survivability, the defensive option. And Bolt is good on pretty much anyone. You can never really fault someone for taking that. I do think Fury is generally better, but Bolt is a perfectly defensible option as well.
Sweet, so with this build, it seems like we're going to be focusing on sustained damage, mobility, and a little bit of survivability on top.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Now we're going to talk about how we should best use Falstad in a game.
So Falstad has one of the most interesting and potentially impactful early games because of flight. Like I said, that means you can join fights at any time. You can always turn around a gank, or secure an objective, or turn a balanced team fight or a gank into a counter gank or an imbalanced team fight. So just always be looking for opportunities to fly in and turn the tides in favor of your team. That's just an incredibly powerful ability, especially early game when everything's very fragmented. You get a lot of one-on-one and two-on-two fights that you can then easily turn. It's very important to also notice that you do have easily underestimated burst damage. Your Q, your hammer, is pretty decent damage, but your Thunderstorm, your W, actually is incredible amounts of damage if you can isolate a target. If you can get all 4 bursts of lightning to hit one target, you do an insane amount of early game burst damage. So that's something to look for. And because you do have flight and you have so much mobility, it is relatively easy to isolate targets and get that one-on-one situation that you're looking for. Just keep in mind that you are very, very squishy. It's very possible for you to die in just a couple of hits, one set of lockdown from an opponent. So always stay at the edge of battles, always look to do your damage from afar and keep yourself safe. And that applies especially so to team fights. You play very much so like Vala, whereas you're just sticking back, you're staying at the edge, you're hitting whoever comes close to you, not necessarily diving in after high priority targets. If someone's running away, you cast your ultimate and you try and pick them off that way. It's not worth diving after them because you're probably going to die if you go anywhere near the brunt of the enemy. But other than that, you're pretty straightforward. You're very right-click focused. Use your abilities on cooldown for the additional damage, but mostly you're just trying to auto-attack and kill people. Playing against Falstad is very difficult in the early game. You just have to keep that in mind. You can never overcommit to something because it can very easily turn around with him flying in behind you and dealing a bunch of damage right away. His global presence is just, it cannot be underestimated or forgot. You just have to give his team a lot of respect early on. And keep in mind that it's not going to be as big a deal later on in 5-on-5 situations. And so you have to make up for it at that point. In team fights, treat him pretty much exactly like a Vala, except there's no option for him to have 2 afterburners, or two barrel rolls, the way she can have 2 tumbles. So if you burn his escape immediately, it's going to be down for a good 14-15 seconds, I believe. So if you can dive after him once, make him run away, then it's very, very scary for him to actually rejoin a team fight, because he's not going to have an escape for pretty much the rest of the duration of the fight. So it's worth diving after him once, but don't overextend, don't chase, don't worry about him too much, because he's not a huge amount of burst damage in the late game. He really has to sit there and click on you for a while. So just scare him off and then go back to the team fight. But the biggest thing about him is just keeping flight in mind. He can be anywhere at any time, and you always have to keep that firmly in mind.
And there you have it, guys. But remember, this is our best way to play, and we want to hear yours in the comments.
Be sure to head over to Greg's Twitch channel for more pro tips, and for everything Heroes of the Storm, stay tuned to IGN.